recording. Okay, there we go. There, it's green. Looks good. Twitch.tv. Make sure that up and live. Alrighty. Oh, fun. Okay. Alrighty. Oh, oof. What did... Just multiple instances of the same sound that I hate happening over and over again. Alright. We are going... Damn it. Tracy Barnett. How do you spell your surname?
Barnett.
That's what I thought. I couldn't remember if it was two N's or not. 0402.
No, then it'd be Barnett.
Yeah.
You'd have to draw out the second bit for so long, it wouldn't even be worth it.
No. You'd just drop that over the years. It'd be one of those.
Yeah, exactly. English linguistics states that everything collapses down to the most easy to say phonemes, and so you just don't want to have a drawn out like that in the middle of anything.
The Ellis Island shift, as I like to think of it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we're doing this thing.
Sweet.
I'm here with Tracy. Tracy, introduce yourself.
Hey, I am Tracy Barnett. I am a queer, non-binary game designer, and I have whiskey that I'm very happy to have, and I'm ready to have Joe ask me whatever and to answer it to the best of my ability. So,
awesome.
Happy, what day is it? Thursday? It's a Thursday, right?
It's a Thursday, yeah.
It's really hard to tell now.
I mean, does it even matter?
Right now, to a degree, it does not, but still, happy Thursday.
Happy day that ends with Y. And because I don't drink, I just have coffee.
Fair.
So we were talking before. This is the second time we're speaking at length, at least.
Voice to voice. We've chatted online, but you reminded me that it's been 5 years since we have seen each other in person.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which is buck wild and does reinforce, like you were just alluding to, that time doesn't actually mean anything. Because it could have been 3 weeks ago, as far as I'm concerned, because one, I was drunk that night too, because it was a convention and that's what I tended to do then. But like, I still remember the energy from that moment. Mm-hmm. Like that's what I take away from me from most conventions where I am into my cups and have been talking to people, is not necessarily the specifics of the conversation. Although I do remember talking to you about publishing and monetizing things, and vaguely at least, but I remember the energy of the conversation, and that's the thing that sustains me in between conventions is that energy.
Totally. I mean, it's a high. I semi joke that like the part of my brain that is 100% a drug addict just wants a life where all I do is go convention to convention for the rest of my life. Just never. Yeah,
my body wouldn't be able to hold up to it. Like, there's no way I would last.
I would die inside of a year and it would still be worth it for me.
Yeah, my brain, I agree with that completely. Like, I have an addictive personality, very much so, and other people and the energy that I get from in-depth, energized, creative conversations with them is 100% the thing that I always want and always feel like I need.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really glad that I've learned to think back to some of those things and let the memory of the energy sustain me. Because if I spent all of my material resources to actually chase that particular high, I'd be fucked. There's no way that I could survive in the capitalist hellscape we live in.
Yeah, I always think of Jack Nicholson in The Departed, just the pile of cocaine and just saying like, put your face in until you don't feel anything. And that's me at cons. And it's just like, yeah, but eventually the body is no longer willing.
Yeah, the spirit is willing, but the flesh has been broken and dragged over the coals.
Basically. And that happens fast.
It happens faster now than it used to. Like round about the time when you and I met was when here at Origins in Columbus, because that's where I live, so it's my local convention. Even still, I would get a hotel room, and there was a year where I was at the Hyatt that was adjoining the convention, right? Where when you go to Origins, if you're familiar, at the Hyatt Regency, there is a bar it's the entire second floor of the Hyatt. It's called the Big Bar on Two, with a big like opening down to the first floor, and then there's like balconies for the third floor, but there's not much going on up on the third. And I sat in that bar and closed it down Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night, which means I didn't get to bed in my hotel room, which was just up an elevator, until 3:30 in the morning, each of those nights. And they were great. Like the nights themselves were fantastic, though I remember very little of them. And I had one of the most memorable Iron Edda sessions ever following one of those nights. But I think about doing that now, and I just get tired. I'm like, no, I cannot do that. Like 10 o'clock rolls around and I'm like, okay, this is cool. If people come, I will feed off of their energy, and I will stay up until whenever I need to stay up. But if people aren't around, if there's not something going on, I'm like wondering how long it's going to take me to drive home. And living in Columbus, that means 10 minutes. I can be home in 10 minutes from Origins and sleeping in my bed and wake up at a reasonable time and go to the show the next day. So,
I mean, I get why Mark Reinhagen developed a bad cocaine addiction, because the way White Wolf was partying at conventions back in the day, like you hit 25 and you're just like, I can't do it anymore.
There was one year at Gen Con that I had an open invitation to the White Wolf party, quote unquote. And this wasn't even in the heyday of White Wolf. This was, before or just as the third edition stuff was coming out.
Oh, okay. So like early aughts.
How was it? No, it would have been later. It would have been after third edition then. So it wasn't even like, it was not the White Wolf parties of yore.
Sure, it was probably like New World of Darkness, like late aughts.
Yeah, it was 2010, 2013, something like that.
Okay.
I had an invite to the White Wolf party at Gen Con one year, and I just remember deciding not to go because my default mode is to be scared of many things and to not try new experiences. I've grown from that in a lot of ways, but back then all I wanted was for people to like me. And and that had a deeply ingrained sense of drugs are bad. Like Barbara Bush did me a wrong with Dare back in the day. There's a story that I told my partner a few years ago, because until I met her, and I met her in 2014, I had never even smoked pot. I had alcohol, I'd had beer, and I had hard liquor or whatever, but I had never done a drug.
Okay.
And there's a moment that I had just ingrained in my mind. I was in 4th grade, and we were doing some standardized testing bullshit, and we were on a restroom break, and that meant the classroom had emptied, right? All the kids were in the restroom because, of course, you had to have a break from a test like that. And I got back into the classroom first, and I was just walking to my desk, and I looked down at the floor, and I saw on the floor what I know now to be a wintergreen Tic Tac. And I thought to myself, is that a drug? Like that, it was like letters of fire in my mind. Is that a drug? And because I grew up in a small town of 3,500 people, right? I've never lived more than 50 miles from where I was born for longer than 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm from Central Ohio, literally born and bred. When I tweeted earlier today about the Adam Koebel stuff that I am inherently a boring person, it's absolutely fucking true. Like, I have to work hard to be interesting, and the venues within which I can be interesting are extremely narrow.
Okay.
I'm engaging as a person one-on-one. Like, I can have fun in a conversation, and you would never guess that I'm really just a very I don't know. I find myself feeling not creative a whole lot more often than I find myself feeling creative, because I rarely, if ever, create something whole cloth. Most of what I do is remixing, right? I find an inspiration in something else and I take it and turn it into whatever I turn it into. And there are people who don't do that. There are people who just create new things. And I'm not a creator of new things. I am a remixer of existing things. And I'm pretty comfortable with that now, which is why I'm comfortable saying, yeah, I'm kind of a boring person.
I mean, but, so I gotta say, I'm both comfortable with the observation, because I think it's true. There are people who, I think of it as authors versus editors. That's usually my like mental framework for it. Some people take a thing and make it good, and some people take nothing and make it something, and you kind of fall into one of those two camps generally. And there are people who are literally authors who I would consider editors, and there are people who are literally editors who I would consider authors. But like, those are the broad dichotomous camps, right? Sure. I think the place where I don't buy the leap is that the author is more creative than the editor. Right, like, I do, I think there is something to the idea that the raw generative process of creating something from nothing is the purest, the platonic form of creativity. Sure. I just don't think that exists, right? Like, very, very few people actually start at nothing. It's just you don't see their influences.
Sure, and I will totally buy that. Like, I can easily buy into the idea that no one creates in a vacuum, right? We are all influenced by the things that are around us, but I think that there are people who are either able to subsume their influences in such a way that it looks 100% authentic, or who are able to obscure their original influences in such a way that you don't see them. So they look more original, for lack of a better word, right? They look like sui generis, they've just made a thing, like sprung fully formed from their head.
I mean, the generous interpretation of that is, okay, so I'm going to start with the ungenerous. The ungenerous interpretation is that you're not actually describing creativity, you're describing falsity.
No, true.
So, and as an accomplished liar, I admire the hell out of people who can do that.
That may cut to the heart of how I feel about things. Is I cannot but wear my influences wholly on my sleeve, right? I am really bad at bluffing. I'm really bad at disguising my actual feelings about things. I do not obfuscate much about me, which I think at some level feeds into this idea that I have that I'm actually not that interesting. Which, hey, I mean, if you're interested in me, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. You're proving me wrong. That's totally cool. But when I look at other people in the world and I see how weird they are and how authentically themselves they are, I find myself at this place where I either need to draw one of two conclusions. It's A, I'm not that interesting, or B, I haven't figured myself out enough to know why I'm interesting. And it's a coin flip as to which is harder to deal with on a given day. And most days I choose I'm not that interesting.
I mean, there is a third option, right? Which is that you're a sap. which is it's that you've bought into the idea that the person who seems the most interesting on the surface and owns it is somehow actually the most interesting, when in fact, often when you have an onion and you just peel the layers back, well, there's more onion inside of it, right?
Sure. And I think you'll find that since I did not even mention that third option, I choose not to buy into that one.
Sure.
So I believe that most people are either not as interesting as they seem or haven't figured themselves out to a degree. But I don't choose to engage with that idea very actively because I would rather believe the best about people always.
And that's probably why I'd say you're not interesting.
Probably.
I'm sorry.
I mean, no. You're completely.
No. I genuinely think you are actually interesting. That was mostly just a dig. But I will say that, like, at least in my experience, nothing is a better predictor of lack of self-worth or a misjudgment of one's own validity as an inherent belief that people are good.
I didn't say that inherently people are good. It's that I choose to believe the best about them.
Okay, fair.
Those are two separate things.
It's fair.
Because I don't really have a dog in the fight as to whether people are good or not. That's a question that doesn't interest me. Because I'm of the belief that people are largely what their actions say they are.
Okay.
Right? You are little more than what you do in the world.
Okay.
Regardless of how you feel about yourself, regardless of how other people feel about you, we are what we do. It's something I've carried over from therapy. Like I took a while to like recognize that context defines everything about who we are and about what we do. So if I am a person who helps my partner when she's hurt or feeling down, if I'm a person who does the dishes, if I'm a person who makes things, right, then that makes me a helping person. That makes me a diligent person. That makes me a creative person. Regardless of my perceptions of things or someone else's perceptions of things, if I do those things that are, I guess, societally defined as helpful or diligent or creative, those are the things that I've done, and I have to accept that.
I guess, so it's not that I disagree. It's that I think there's a missing component. So I come from a perspective of, like, I think more often about the outliers who manipulate things, right?
Okay.
To what you might call dark triad personality traits. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, things like that. I have had the good fortune in some ways, poor fortune in another, to encounter a lot of people like that in my life and to share many of those traits.
Sure.
I have done many a good thing from an entirely self-serving place. In fact, it is shocking to me when some people relay what they believe to be true about me when they view my actions, because they are entirely divorced from my intentions. And although I can understand on a surface level as an observer that, like, what's the most absurd hypothetical I can come up with to illustrate this? Just because the guy's holding the girl's hair as she throws up doesn't mean that he's doing it to be her friend.
Right. Sure.
Right, like, there is the guy who doesn't even bother to hold her hair as she throws up, but then there's also the guy who didn't feed her drinks all night to sleep with her.
Right. So, but then context matters then too, right?
Sure.
Like, you can be the guy who hasn't fed her drinks all night, and you can, but you're absent that situation of holding the hair. So at a certain level, are you the person who is holding her hair regardless of your intention better than the guy who didn't?
I'd say
yes.
No.
I'd say yes.
The guy who fed her drinks all night long to sleep with her and is
but
now holding her hair.
Okay, so I was divorcing those two things. So no,
But that's the thing. You can't. Just because you didn't observe the intention that was ill doesn't mean that you can exculpate it, right? It doesn't mean you can take it away.
Sure, but you also cannot define someone's current actions by the intention you did not see.
No, and that's why I say that an observation is not sufficient.
Right.
Right? Like, and that's why I'd say that when you define a person based on only observable reactions, you can never actually properly define the person.
100%. I totally agree with that. The thing that I'm applying this only to myself, right?
Sure.
So I have the benefit of knowing both my intention and the outcome of that intention. And the work that I can do on myself as a person is to examine the intention and go, okay, was that intention something that was proven worthy by the outcome, right? Did I do this for the right reasons? And over time, I can interrogate my intention and I can switch my intention while the outcome remains the same. I can have been, and in some cases maybe have been, the asshole who fed you drinks all night to hold your hair back. And as time goes on, because I'm interrogating my own intention, I can not have been the asshole who's feeding you drinks all night, who is working to keep you safe. And also, by the way, I'm here holding your hair back. Like, I have tendencies that do not run toward the altruistic.
Sure.
I have had for a long time. I recognize that about myself, and I see where my behaviors have been beneficial to other people, but maybe the reason I did the behaviors wasn't great. So I have worked very hard to interrogate my reasons and to change them, to go, okay, well, is it actually a nice thing to do X, right? To hold someone's hair back? Sure. Am I in the situation where I can hold someone's hair back because I've been doing shitty things? Ooh, if that's the case, let me start not doing shitty things, but find ways to still be in the situation to be a help.
Sure.
Like that has literally been the work of the last decade of my life, because I have extremely narcissistic tendencies. I have extremely selfish tendencies. I very easily can be a person that I would not want to be hanging around. I can be very charming in narrow channels, right? Like I can engage with someone, and if we're talking about something that makes me feel smart or validated, I can just turn it on. I'm good. I'm there. And I have been working very hard to expand that to be someone who is engaged with and engageable, even if it doesn't directly benefit me. Because I think that's of a greater good than doing the opposite. And it's still a very narrow scope. I'm only looking at my own behaviors.
No. I mean, you're talking about the rehabilitative arc, right?
Yeah. I've been an inveterate asshole for a long time.
Sure.
And if you were watching this and you didn't think that about me, I've done a really good job of hiding it or eliding over it or not being that around you specifically. It's a part of myself that I don't like, that I'm not proud of in the slightest, that I have been working very diligently to not have be the me that you see.
So as someone who is very much in the same situation, not just since I've started in this industry, which is now about 7 years, but like most of my life.
Yeah.
That is the arc of my life. I had the benefit of starting therapy at a very young age. Even then, if anything, all it did for the first decade and a half was teach me how to be more undetectably awful rather than how to be better.
That's not a horrible starting point.
Yeah.
Let's be fair. Being undetectably awful in a society that is very superficial and values undetectability of when you can't detect someone's intent and all you can see is their actions. Mm-hmm. That's a prized thing in our society, and that's where most people in our society stop.
Yep.
If you are taking the step beyond that, personally, professionally, whatever, to reflect it back and look at your own intent and still garner the praise or the whatever from being the person who was there when someone was in need.
Mm-hmm.
But your intent is more about them and less about you.
Mm-hmm.
You're fucking winning. Like,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
doing work that most people in society don't do. And I realize I'm lauding myself when I say that, because I feel like I've done that to a degree, but
it.
like, I'm not upset about that. I'm like, you're doing a good job.
It's an almost unassailable, like, objective good. I do agree with that. And I mean, for me, what ended up happening is it destroyed my life and had to basically start from zero and got sober and, like, voila. But
yeah, I mean, I'm married for the second time. Like, there are reboots that happen, and they do not come. They do not come without cost.
Totally. And in a sense, I'd argue that they probably shouldn't.
Yep, I probably agree with that.
I guess to bring it back home, right? We're both in the same business, and that business is games.
Yep. Home. You haven't asked me a single question yet.
Yeah, it's true.
No, it's just funny because you introed me, and this is where we are now after you having introed me.
Yeah, seriously.
This is great.
So what is the place for the rehabilitative arc in the discourse? And I use Fiona Maeve Geiss, disc, CD, horse, gallop,
right.
discourse. And this is a thing that I've struggled with for a few years now, where I think there are people who need to get the fuck out of the industry. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, we've been decent about that. Macros. In some cases, it's taken us far too long, and we're still dealing with ramifications. Zach, Raggy, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
There are, however, less extreme, less clear-cut cases. It's not all people we can all kind of agree are terrible and need to go, and just problems or whatever, lack of political will causing us to not deal with it up front. Sometimes there are just edge cases. People who do bad things but may not be bad people, or do good things but come from a bad place. How do we deal with that and this is a fundamentally unanswerable question in a generic way, but like, what do we do when we come up against that wall of we yeet this person out of the fucking world, when probably the more appropriate reaction in a rehabilitative sense is to help them do the work?
So I will start by saying that, yes, this is an unanswerable question. And that there's no blanket answer that I can give you, because context, if I've learned one thing from doing world building, context means everything, right? A knife can mean so many different things depending on the context that you see it. If it's laying on a cutting board, it means you're going to chop vegetables. If it's in someone's hand, it means they might hand it to you. If their posture is different, it means they're going to stab you. And you have to approach the knife extremely differently depending on that context. So when you're talking about someone who is a bad actor in the industry, right? If you start with just that statement, industry is a capital I, bad actor with a capital B and a capital A. You are talking about things that are affecting the arc of theoretically millions of people, right? So the impact of their actions is far greater than if you're talking about the one douchebag who won't stop making dick jokes at your D&D table that has 6 people at it.
Yes.
So the approach you have to take in those instances is vastly different. Because if it is the D&D table with 6 people, you could say, hey, Derek, that's not cool. Knock it the fuck off, right? And Derek then gets to go home after the session and think about their actions and come back to the table and either do an aggressive dick joke or not, and the problem is solved or not. When you're talking about the industry as a whole, you're talking about people that are acting on a scale that is almost incomprehensible, right? You're talking about people that, and even though the industry is small, comparatively speaking,
Sure.
you're talking about people whose actions have ripples you cannot see. So let's bring up the big pink bearded elephant in the room. Adam Koebel did a thing a few days ago on a live stream that you can find evidence of out in the world, where he perpetrated sexual assault on a player character by an NPC that was neither asked for nor consented to by the player in the context of what happened in that session. Mm-hmm. Adam has a bunch of reach in the industry because he has co-designed Dungeon World, which is an indie darling. Mm-hmm. He is the game master in residence for Roll20. Mm-hmm. And he has a huge, comparatively speaking, within the tabletop industry, Twitch following, mm-hmm. in that he can be doing a conversation stream and have 251 people actively watching what he does. Yeah. Right? So with that elevation comes eyeballs, and it comes responsibility. So I literally do not know how to approach that particular situation. In an ideal world, Adam would have gone, oh shit, I fucked up. And not only did I fuck up, but I hurt the 4 or 5 people at my table, mm-hmm. right? Because the stream has been canceled. Like, it's not happening anymore. And beyond that, there are countless people who either watched it happen live, mm-hmm. found out about it post facto, mm-hmm. and watched it, or found out about it, will not expose themselves to trauma by watching it, mm-hmm. and it just ripples through the industry. So how do we approach that person? Mm-hmm. I have no fucking idea, because when it comes down to it, in an ideal world, a person in that position would be aware of the power dynamics at play, mm-hmm. and would have some type of recognition of their own power in the situation, mm-hmm. and they would act accordingly, right? They would recognize the outsized impact they have, mm-hmm. and they would not just apologize, but would make recompense toward the person harmed. Mm-hmm. They would apologize to the audience at large, and they would actively and publicly, because they are a public persona, not for any other reason, but because they have this impact in the world, and then they recognize that, they would make recompense publicly. They would promote safety tools. They would do... If I happened to be in that position where I had harmed someone with that kind of audience, I would be repentant, mm-hmm. right? We're talking sackcloth and ashes, biblical-ass bullshit, because I would feel so fucking bad that I might have hurt somebody that I would want to retreat into a hole, and rather than do that, because I'm a public persona, I would repent as hard as I could, and I would show other people how not to do what I did. But we're not seeing that reaction in this particular case. We're seeing a half-hearted apology, the cancellation of a stream, and a fart in the wind. Like, it feels like he is hoping this all blows over, and that he can get back to what he's used to his comfort zone, to the privilege he has of having a platform. And I don't like it. Right? Like, because context is so important, if you are in the context where you have a huge following and you have a lot of people who watch what you do, I feel very strongly that you have a responsibility to model best behaviors and best practices. And if you're not doing that, the closest you can get to rehabilitation is modeling good behaviors after the fact. And if you choose not to do that, I don't know what to do with you. So except to yeet you into the stratosphere and hope to never have to deal with you again. Sure. And that is very much a slash and burn like approach to community management and to industry management. Mm-hmm. But like, I don't know what else to do. if you've got that much influence and you're not saying I'm sorry in a way that is tangible and that it matters, then I don't fucking want you around. I don't care how brilliant you are. I don't care how great of a game you might have made. Like, you're hurting people.
Mm-hmm.
And you're hurting people because your influence is so big. Fucking get out. Go away. Like, that's my gut response. And I realize that a real world response is far more nuanced than that. But I have the benefit of not actually having any influence. Like, I can't change any of this. So I can say all of this without fear of repercussion.
Sure.
That's a form of privilege in and of itself, right? But God damn, how can you have the audience you have and not be cognizant of your responsibility to treat your players safely? If you don't have that, how can you be trusted with an audience?
Sure. I've been the whole time you were saying that, I was thinking of phrasing of something. Obviously I was listening as well, but the follow-up question for me is, I feel like there's a material difference between what I think of as how do I phrase this? There are expectations that are simultaneously needed and unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is just a thing in the world. It's not localized to games. Skullboy, I feel the same way, actually, for what it's worth, in chat. But when it comes to influencers, right? Big eye influencers. I don't know where the evidence lies on a aggregate way that these individuals, or that any individual who accumulates clout of any meaningful stature, on average, or even within a few standard deviations of average, has the, be it integrity, self-awareness, perhaps, as Skullboy says, just grit, to act in accordance with what might be the best manner of action for the collective, right? And so it is both a needed expectation that they act better, and yet I can't help but argue that it's also a deeply unreasonable expectation based on the evidence.
The evidence being capitalism.
Sure, within the gestalt culture that we operate within of.
Exactly. And so I agree with you, because I can see someone with clout not having the grit, again, as Skullboy points out, to not stand up and really apologize. But the irony, the deeply painful irony of all of this is that I think that if someone with Kobol's clout, as you put it, actually apologized, they would gain more long-term true believer fans and devotees than if he pursued things the way he is currently doing.
Totally.
And again, it's still an anti-capitalist move even if you do that, because the people that you would get to adhere to you if you actually gave a legit apology and backtracked and made all the corrections, they're the people with no fucking capital to give you. Right? There is a host of people who have not the economic, social, societal, structural means to support you, who may be your fans, and who may stand for you until the end of time, that you will lose. But because capitalism, it's okay if you lose them, because you're going to gain more followers who can give you dollars if you don't.
Yep.
And that is truly, honestly fucked.
Oh yeah.
And I hate that about this entire situation, because any number of people, myself included, could make very pro-capitalist moves and start like pandering, not even pandering, just start like appealing to an audience that we don't really align with, that we don't really like, that doesn't quite believe what we believe, but oh boy, they've got dollars. And we could be okay in the current circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to do that so fundamentally that I could not even start thinking about how to do that. It's a non-option for me because I would rather, and this may peel all the way back to me saying that I'm uninteresting and boring. Uninteresting and boring may just be code for not capitalistically appealing. And if that's the case, then that's a badge of fucking pride, not something to be down about, right? Because interest often equates to dollars.
I mean, that's the core of the influencer mindset.
It is. And I don't think I fucking have it. I don't think I have whatever it is that lets me regard people as such commodities that I can pander right to those commodities and get the subsequent dollars that come from it. There's a disconnect somewhere. I'm falling apart a little bit.
No.
Still, but like, good God, when you predicate your entire career on relying on people to send you money because of who you are, I cannot help but imagine that takes your mindset and twists it to a degree that it's very difficult to come back from that and to view people as people and not just like inputs and outputs.
Sure.
Like, I output this particular type of content, they input dollars. This is good.
I mean, so the way I think of it, I guess I think of it as two ways. One, I am the weird person in this scene. Cecil's having a good time.
Oh, good.
I'm the weird person in this industry where, like, before I got into games, like when I was in college, I was the most corporate fucking capitalistic motherfucker you can imagine. I wanted to work in management consulting. I considered myself a hard libertarian. I
feel sorry for past you.
Yeah, I was a fucking dick. I was a monster. But they're like, it's given me some great, like, it's given me some good frameworks for things that I no longer agree with, but I understand the language of the opposition.
Sure, and that there's value in that.
And so I think of it as an incentives problem, first and foremost, as a good libertarian would, as a good structuralist capitalist would. It's an incentives problem, but it's more than that. It's a game design problem. It's a loop, right? When you think of people and their dollars as an input, you can reframe that as a game, right? And just because I am Sonic and I've collected a bunch of coins and I run into some spikes, right? Well, in a grand scheme, someone intelligent, someone observant might think, well, the smart thing is don't run really, really fast and jump in places where there might be spikes. But a game player of that game is just going to take a minute and collect all the coins and keep going. And that's... Oh no, Tracy, did you freeze or are you just really, really still?
That was on me. My internet froze. I'm back now.
All right. Hey, did you hear any of what I just said?
Not a bit of it.
Damn. All right. God damn it. I don't even know if
Heinlein... Oh God, did you bring up Heinlein? I'm seeing negative code.
No, we're fucking talking about fucking libertarianism and
okay, fair enough.
This went all fucking... God damn it. All right.
I'm sorry.
Good to know. No, it's not you. It's not you at all. I got nothing. I got fucking nothing. I'm stone dead. Crispy dead. Let's actually talk about games for like 15 minutes.
That's fine.
Let's like actually do that.
I mean, so to be fair, this is what I was talking about earlier. I am happy going longer. I will help you transcribe this shit. Let's fucking go.
All right, let's see how long we can keep this going. At the very least, I need a smoke break at some point in the future.
That's fine. You know what? You can take a smoke break, and I will entertain the chat.
You'll
I will
just like hold
talk.
court.
Yeah, 100%.
Fuck it. That works for me.
There you go.
All right.
Chris Sims, don't be calling us out for language.
Seriously.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Okay, so what do you got going games wise right now?
God, right now I am. God, what am I doing? So the fucking quarantine has made things so strange. So my partner had symptoms of COVID-19 about a week and a half ago.
Oh no!
Right, it was fever, dry cough, right, and we're not taking any chances. So she sent a message to her doctor, because she has a GP. I don't. And her GP said, okay, here's a doctor's note to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been largely in the house for a week now. And I'm not going back to my job, which is to be the beer buyer for a retail store for another week. Like, I won't go back to work until Wednesday. And all of the creative stuff that I do, because I have a quote-unquote survival job, is predicated around the context of going to work at these times during the day, during the week. Mm-hmm. And even a week removed from all of that, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing creatively right now. It's really strange, because I will keep circling back to this, because if there's anything that I've learned from doing the world building podcast that I'm doing with my friend Kate, that's Army of Meat on Twitter, it's that context is the most important thing. When you're talking about what class you want to play in a D&D campaign, mm-hmm. right? It doesn't matter what class you are playing absent the context of that campaign. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be doing this thing where you're exploring new territories, you're just going about the world and doing different things, does it matter that you're a monk of the Four Roses school? Probably not. You're a dude that can punch shit a whole lot, mm-hmm. right? So if you want that to matter, if you want your school of monkery to be important, then it has to be important in the campaign. Mm-hmm. The context has to matter. So creatively right now, like, the most recent thing that I did is I wrote a small game called Bluestone Investigation and Research. Okay. That I literally wrote because I reached out to a couple of friends and said, hey, do you want to play a one-off RPG on Tuesday night? And they said yes. And I looked through all of my backlog of RPG content that I haven't consumed yet, but I've purchased. And I couldn't find anything that quite fit the vibe for these two people, so I just fucking wrote a new game. This is where I am now in my design arc, is, there's a context that requires a particular game for these two types of people. Cool, let me write a new game for it. So I did that, and I'm probably going to change the logo that I put out and whatever, but it was a fine time. It was a fun game. So there was that, and then I'm doing a rewrite of Dungeons and Dragons, because who doesn't go through that in their creative arc, I guess?
Any particular D&D, or just the platonic ideal of D&D?
5th edition in particular.
Okay.
And with the idea that you don't have to go into it with the idea that you are going to colonize and expand and just kill monsters.
Okay.
For things. You don't just beat a dragon until all of its gold and XP come out.
Okay.
Right.
A weird scaly pinata of gold.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what a lot of D&D boils down to. Mm-hmm. And there are exceptions, right? Because you can craft good story around D&D, and you can do a lot of different things around that framework. But I want a system that makes you want to tell stories first.
Okay.
Because stories are the most important thing to me, right? Be it your individual character story, the story of the town you start from,
Sure.
whatever it is. Like, stories are the most important, and just having a campaign that goes from like fight to fight to fight, where the contexts of those fights don't line up, it doesn't work for me.
Okay,
Like,
so I've immediately a question that I think I was
please.
probably going to ask earlier, and just this seems like a good time to have it. Does context mean mechanization?
It can, definitely.
Okay.
Right? Because the mechanics of the system you're using, like, those feed into how you portray your character.
Sure.
So as Skullboy says, that's up to the people, right? Like, you have to have everyone bought into the idea of what you're doing. And at a given table, you can be using D&D 5th edition to do whatever you want to, really, right? Like, you can tell a ton of romance stories, and you can make up mechanics for romantic interactions and what have you.
Sure.
But if there's a system that sort of defines that the group you have at your table, that they're the ones who are defining the context of your campaign, that's really important to me. And D&D as written doesn't have that right now. D&D 5e primarily says that the table is subservient to the GM, right? The GM presents the campaign, and this is what you're doing. But if, let me draw back a little bit, right? Like, so one of the things that I discovered as I was writing Iron Edda, and right, the whole campaign is predicated upon
describe Iron Edda for just people who might not know.
Sure. Iron Edda is a fate-based mecha game when Ragnarok is happening across the world, right? That's your baseline. And also, the bones of dead giants can act as mecha, right? Like, that's the big hook to that whole game. But the whole game starts out with the group answering questions about the settlement that you started, your holdfast.
Sure.
So you are literally defining the context of your struggle against Ragnarok in your initial questioning. So what if D&D were like that, right? Like, what if you started off not with the GM saying, oh yeah, you're in the town of Scaleyheim, and you are you have lizard people besetting you on one side, and you have goblins besetting you on the other side. You have a mayor who is ineffectual, and you are people who wish to effect change, right? Instead of that being the starting context, you're literally defining it as you are playing. So the GM turns to you and says, the town of Scaleyheim is beset by lizard people, right? We have a conceit from the setting that is lizard people are attacking. And the players have to then respond to that right now before a character has been made, before anything else.
Okay.
Thereafter, your gold idol. How does the town protect the gold idol, and how does the town view the gold idol as more important than any of their other things, right? This is not a refined question, because
I mean, of course,
but you get the idea, right?
These are formalized, mechanized ways of introducing context to an adventuring situation. Yeah,
exactly, because you have one person answer that question, and as they answer, you define particular things about the setting, about the bounds within which you're acting.
Sure.
And when everyone goes around the table and does that, they have a chance to feed into that very directly.
Sure.
So then, once that is all done, once all 4 or 5 or whatever players answer those questions, they then go back into their own corners and they make characters that reflect the answers they've given, or the others have given, right? And the GM gets to go, okay, well, this is the setting I've been handed. It has things that I have defined because the questions that you ask are leading questions. They assume certain things as you're asking them. And you get a chance to make a place that is both yours as the GMs and is the players, depending on what class they make and whatever. But it is more than the GM giving an info dump and saying, this is the setting and this is what I expect for everything. And the players going, oh yes, I will feed this into what you have given me.
Sure.
It's a collaborative experience from the beginning. And I think that a game like Dungeons and Dragons can benefit very much from that, because once you start playing a game of D&D, or really any game, like you could be playing a game in the Forgotten Realms, and the GM can info dump a bunch of information about Faerun and like fucking call it Waterdeep, and even like we're going to be in the North Ward, right? This is the part of Waterdeep we're going to be in. As soon as the GM is done talking and has delivered all that information, as soon as the players say, okay, well, cool, I'm going to be this within that context, it's different. It's different than the rules as written. It's different than all the lore that's been presented, because you have these other brains who are engaging with it. So why not like take the burden off of the GM of like providing all of this information, and why not say, okay, here's your basic context, and players answer questions to provide your own personal context for all of this. And by the time we're done, by the time that I, the GM, have said, here's the setting, and the players have said, cool, here's my part of it, 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 we have a thing we're all building together. Like, that's so much more powerful. And it's a thing, it's a context that everyone can engage into, rather than I am the narrator giving you the things, and you as the player have to respond to them after we've made all these important character decisions.
Okay, so one, I agree with all of that. So I don't really have much to say on it. Yay, that was great. Two, I guess the question I have is, I would put all of that in a particular bucket, which is mechanized context, right? All of those things I would consider formal design mechanics. They are things that you are implementing. They are pieces of game tech that are designed to create context collaboratively. What is the place for non-mechanized context? And it's kind of a difficult question, because what does that even mean in a design space? Does that just mean the part of D&D absent changing the rules to do things collaboratively where the characters and players talk? Is it something more? But I think this is one of the big questions perennially, or at least for the past decade, really, between various silos of the industry, is who bears the responsibility for creating context. Is it the designer giving the players the tools? Is it the players reclaiming it despite the designers not giving them tools? Or is it somewhere in between?
My answer is yes.
Fair.
Right? Like, I think that if the designer is providing the appropriate tools, then the players never have to ask the question, can I reclaim blah? Because the tools give them the power to do that.
Sure.
And they will then, at times, run up against the GM, who has their own ideas about the setting, which has been informed by the player's input, right? So already, if you're starting with GM over here, trying to turn my hand so the camera looks like it's a vertical line there, and you have the players over here, there we go, right? So if the rules say the GM gives this much context, and the players respond with questions, they go, okay, here, 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 and here, based on their questions. And you only have that small gap to bridge. whether you're the player or the GM. And look, all my fingers fold down, and I can make a pretty pyramid right over my head, right? Whereas traditional D&D has the players over here and the GM over here. And the GM says, this is the setting. And the players say, this is my character. And you have this much distance between all of them to try and navigate to make something that connects.
Yeah.
There's never going to be a perfect meeting where the GM's idea and the player's ideas just go like that, right? So what you want to do is, in my opinion, make a context within which the player's stuff and the GM stuff overlaps to a degree that if you collapse the hands within this infinitesimal space that you cannot see between my hands, you have collaboration and creativity where if you trace it back, you can't really go, was that the GM's idea? Was that my idea? Was that someone else's idea? It doesn't fucking matter because everyone is so much on the same page that you're just telling a story together, right? And I think it's very important to have all of that start from the beginning. So that's why Iron Edda starts with a few only very basic, like, collaborative things. There are a few things that are true, right? Ragnarok is happening. You have people who are bonded to the bones of dead giants, and you can summon up bone mecha from those things. And everyone belongs to a warrior clan. There are 9 of those. Most of you will pick one. That's it. Those are the 3 things that are true. So that is all the GM can hold on to during everything else. As the players roll and hold fast questions, they get to answer things like, the golden halls of your holdfast are the envy of all in the realm of Midgard. Like, why did the Jarl decide to do that? And you get to pick those things completely absent. Like, that's not your character. That's not the thing you have agency over during play. You get to have a meta decision about what that means because you rolled the dice and got that question. And I think that giving players that empowerment in those instances lets them know that, okay, cool, I defined this thing about the setting at large while before we started playing. Now, while I'm playing, if I go, can I do blah? And it veers into the GM's traditional territory of, oh, well, that's the golden halls of the holdfast. You can't mess with that. You can be like, well, no, I'm the one that fucking made those things what they were, right? As a player, like back in character creation.
Yeah.
So I have a chance to say, well, no, maybe this thing happens. And the GM goes, that's cool as shit. Let's do that. Because one of the hardest things about running a game is being your own singular mind versus or in collaboration with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 other minds. Like, running 4th edition D&D fell apart for me eventually because I was one person setting up these combats, these tactical grid-based, like, oh, I need to move 5 squares this way and whatever, combats against 5 or 6 other people who were better at that shit than I was. And so all this game design stuff that I do comes from my history, right? It comes from doing all this stuff, and it comes from a place where I wonder, how can we not take the stuff that the GM knows and the stuff that the players know? Can we not close that gap and make a realm where everyone is making things together, but there's still dramatic tension because there are still interesting unknowns?
So one of the things that, from what you said at the very end, really is the big part for this. But
yeah, it takes me a while to get to points when I'm
no. I mean, that's not what I meant. It's not that the rest of it just fucking discarded and it's
fuck it all.
Fuck it all, whatever. No, none of it's good. It's all trash. I don't know why I spent an hour doing this. No, not what I mean. The last part made me think about something we were talking about earlier, which is considerate people trying to find consideration for your fellow individuals, both when you have power and when you do not, but especially when you have power. And I think one of the big You don't have to drink along. If you want to drink along, you can, but you don't have to. One of the big things for me is does it basically come down to your, I want to say, jamming style? Can inconsiderateness be a jamming style? Is that a valid way to refer to it? I just want to give a very concrete example, all right? So before we were doing this, I was running a game for some children in 5e, some just straight up fucking murder hobos. Kids who, like, do not care at all, just want to destroy shit, just want to steal shit. That's all I wanted. And that's great for a single session, but my line of business is I run campaigns. I teach games. I like that. There needs to be an iteration. There needs to be a continuance, which means that murder hobos kind of have to get dragged kicking and screaming until eventually they have buy-in. For that type of player, what's essentially a considerate collaborative method fundamentally doesn't work.
Right.
Being an arbiter, right? Being a referee in a traditional phrasing, actually works best for that kind of player until they have the buy-in.
Right.
Is that a flaw in the people? Is that a flaw in the design? Is that a flaw in me as a GM? That I simply haven't found the way to give them collaborative space to work that they take advantage of.
How old are the players in question in your particular scenario?
One was 8, one was 10.
Cool. Yeah, so no, it is definitely not a flaw in you. It's not a flaw in the players. It's not a flaw in the system. They're 8 and 10.
Yeah.
Like, they're... For the examples that I've given, we're not talking about people who, by dint of lack of physiological maturity and their brains literally not being able to comprehend certain things, are not buying into stuff, right? Like, that's not the question here. It is people who ostensibly are adults with fully functional cognitive reasoning, right? Who are in a situation where they are given a fictional scenario of which they know the bounds, either consciously or unconsciously. They've absorbed it directly or they're getting it implicitly. And they are given a scenario. They're given the context of the situation. And they are told to answer a question or not. Now, I realize as a person, there are a whole lot of people that I may have left out of that scenario. And I apologize if I've denigrated anyone in this instance. That's not what I'm going for here. But even with an 8-year-old, you can sit them down and you can give them some very basic facts. You can say, you are a warrior of your village. You are brave and heroic. When this situation happens, what do you think happens? And then you can extrapolate from that, right? It's about knowing your audience and knowing how to phrase all these things. I've run Iron Edda for groups there was a table I ran at Origins a few years ago that had a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 13-year-old, a something-year-old, and a goddamn adult, right? And because the younger children were like the biggest piece of that fucking pie, I angled everything their direction because that's the group I had in front of me. That was the context within which I was operating. So when the 6-year-old who was there with her dad wasn't fucking playing. Her dad was her coach. So her dad, like, took the questions I asked and interpreted them for me so she could understand them. And she gave answers. She fucking killed a Dwarven destroyer with a crossbow from the battlements of the goddamn Holdfast because everything that happened made sense to her. And I think that may be the thing that is most important to me about all of this is there are no broad answers. There are no blanket answers for what happens when big person X in the industry fucks up. There are no blanket answers for how do you provide the right context for your table, because every single different person at your table changes my answer to that question, right? You have to look at the people that are in front of you. You have to fucking read them. You have to know that this person is here to like chop off heads and loot bodies. This person wants a romance. This person over here wants to complicated interdynamic interplay between the players. This person over here is here because out of the context of the game, they have the hots for the third person over here. And they're here because they're just fucking here. Like, in a given moment, you have to do your best. And again, I say do your best because this is a difficult thing to do. You have to do your best to read that table and provide them a game that they are interested in. That's why I think the very contextual based question asking setup of an Iron Edda game, which I'm baking this shit into this D&D rewrite that I talked about, right? You can be in I'm in Blaviken, like in The Witcher, right? Oh my god, there's a group of people that were all killed by The Witcher. How do you feel about that, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what question you get asked because it's your answer that provides the context. So for a given table, we're playing The Witcher. We are going to be in Blaviken, which was this town that is apparently run by a wizard of some kind and has all these people ensorcelled, and everyone attacked this Witcher, and it's the aftermath of this big event. That's the starting context, but the real context that matters is what do all of my players around the table say in response to my questions? Like, what did they give me in that moment? And there's a big divide between writing a game that enables you to do that for a theoretically infinite number of tables and being able to do that in the context of a single table at a convention. Like, regardless of whether you're presenting a framework for people to be able to engage with, to do this same thing that you do at your table, at their tables, or you are sitting in front of 5 people who have never played this system before and who simply want to tell a story together, or who are at a convention for the first time, or who are just like, oh my god, coronavirus has been happening and I just want to interact with people for the first time in 6 months. Like, that's context will never not matter, and it matters on multiple levels, right? You're talking about the people who are at your table. You're talking about the framework of the situation you're offering them, and you're talking about their characters that are 2 or 3 layers removed from who they are as real people, and you're trying to provide a story, a moment, a chunk of 4 hours of their finite mortal lives that give them a good time. And it can feel like a lot. It can be so much. At the very beginning of this conversation, I referenced being massively hungover when I was running at Games on Demand at Origins, right? I didn't say it explicitly, but I was like, I had been up till 4:30 in the morning on a Friday night or on a Thursday night, and I had to come into Games on Demand at Origins on Friday at 9 in the morning.
Stands to reason you might have even still been drunk.
Entirely possible. I had 3.5 hours of sleep, and I was running Iron Edda War of Metal and Bone. And at Games on Demand that particular morning, I had 6 people. My max was 6. I had 6 people sitting down at this table. And I had 5 people that seemed to have a good camaraderie amongst each other. And there was one person that I sort of tangentially knew. I'm like, yeah, we're going to do this. One of the 5 other people says, hey, there are 2 other folks who we come to this con with that may come by later. Is it okay if they sort of sit in and watch the session? Because we're a group that used to play regularly together over the years, but we don't get to do that anymore. So we're hoping to play at this con. So about 15, 20 minutes passes, and these other people sort of come by and are hanging around the table. And at the moment, I am hungover, and looking at a table of potentially 8 players, right? Because I see these other 2 people come in, and there's camaraderie, there's like engagement, like they're all vibing together, and so I say, fuck it. You have tokens, set them down on the table. We're going to do an 8-player session. And again, I say this because context matters, right? With a group of 6 randos, there's no way I could have done this. It would not have functioned.
No, you wouldn't write on the book plays up to 8.
Yeah. But the context of that particular session told me that these 6 people plus the 2 that I knew could work. So I said, do you have tokens? Cool. Set them down. When the person comes around, I'll tell them I expanded the table to 8. We're going to do this. Everyone answered hold-fast questions, right? We all contributed to the context of this session. Everyone made characters. We've got a leader. We've got a bone bonded. We've got all these different things, right? And it ended up being this session that was like this big political intrigue, and the Jarl had like a need to choose who their successor was, and so people were like on each side of an honor duel, and it was this amazing collaborative thing between 8 players and one super tired and hungover GM. Fast forward to Saturday, right? The next day at this convention, in the evening session. And I sit down at Games on Demand, and the person who's handling muster runs over and says, oh, by the way, your card said 6, but I have 7 people seated at this table. Is that okay? I look over at the table, the 6 players who had said, yeah, we're part of a gaming group, but we never get to play together. All 6 of them were there, plus one other that I knew, like a guy that I knew.
Yeah.
And so I walked over, and one of the original 6 said, can we keep playing the same story that we did yesterday? And I said, do you have the map and your character sheets? They said, yes. And they ran to their hotel room and got everyone's character sheets and the map we had from the day before. And so much of that was dependent on context, right? If they wouldn't have been the 6 people they were, right? If we hadn't had the cooperative buy-in that we had, then I wouldn't have been able to do the same thing the next day. We continued the story. We made another Bone Bonded, and we had a big fight against Dwarven Destroyers, and it was those 2 sessions at Origins were some of the best Iron Edda sessions that I've ever had. And it was fucking wild that it could happen. But this is the point of all of this, is that context matters. The context of your specific table, who you are as a GM, who all of your players are as people, in that given moment, be there a pandemic on the loose or not, whatever it is, right? When you sit down at your table, your players aren't just bringing characters to you. They're bringing themselves through the lens of those characters. And what's happening to them in their real lives, if they just had a breakup, if they just lost a job, if they just got promoted, all of that stuff is filtering through the make-believe person they're putting in front of you, right? And that's both the magic and the tragic portion of RPGs. Is you have to be, I think, if you're being a good steward of what's in front of you, if you are literally thinking of your session as the best night your players could have, you have to do your best to know where they're coming from and what's going on. And you have to ask them, you have to say, hey, how are you doing tonight? Is there anything that's off the table tonight? Is there anything that you want to see tonight? And it doesn't matter what you planned before the session, right? You just have to go, okay, these people in front of me have come for an experience. Yes, it's camaraderie. Yes, it's friendship. Yes, we're at a convention. I've never seen any of these people before in my life. What are you here for? maybe you don't ask the question directly, but you ask it tangentially. You try and plumb the depths of them in a moment and go, okay, what do you want out of this session? And that's why I think asking questions and letting people provide context into the given thing you're doing is so important, because it lets you ask the question of what are you here for without directly asking it. Because if I ask you, if I say, hey, Joe, why do you want to do this interview tonight?
Ass.
Fair enough. But you're an outlier, right? Like you already know your reasons for doing this. But if we're sitting down at a game table and I were to say to you, so why do you want to play Thrognar the Barbarian after everyone's picked characters? Like, that can be a paralyzing moment.
Mm-hmm.
If before characters are picked, you ask someone, the Jarl of your holdfast is embezzling from the holdfast. What does this mean for the entirety of the region?
Mm-hmm.
And how does the Snake Clan choose to respond to it? You get to divorce yourself from your own personal shit. Mm-hmm. You get to go, oh no, I don't care about why I'm here. I get to take why I'm here and filter it through these questions and answer the question without having to be put on the fucking spot, without having to be vulnerable. People are scared of being vulnerable. And that's good. That's fine. People can be whatever they want to be. Mm-hmm. But if you want people to really engage with a game session, you need to ask them to be their true, authentic selves without feeling imperiled. So you ask them a question that lets them feed into the setting, that gives them empowerment. When you get to answer a question about a setting, someone else's game they fucking wrote, and you get to be like, this is why the Snake Clan did blah. It's a stupid little fucking question. It doesn't really matter.
And yet it does.
Exactly. Except in the context of that session, it means everything. And everyone around the table gets that moment to be bold and brave and to feed their true selves into that game without having to take their armor down, without having to be hurt themselves. You get to put yourself into the scenario without being hurt. And what's fucking better than that? You get to like play in a space you've made without risk of self-harm. Like, it's great. And that's what I fucking wish D&D could be, right? That's what I wish were codified into the rules. That's why I want to write a goddamn rewrite of the entire system, because that is what the game asks of people all the time, but it's not written into the rules. Like, the Forgotten Realms can be whatever. It can be Eberron. It can be Dragonlance. It can be Dark Sun or Planescape. I don't fucking care. But when you look at a person in the eyes and you say, okay, we're playing a Planescape campaign. Mm-hmm. By the way, the governors have issued a different rule that echoes across the entire city on the Spire. What is that rule and how are people reacting to it? Boom! Right? Suddenly they have ownership over the entire governor's faction. Mm-hmm. And they get to say a thing that echoes across the entirety of the city on the Spire. You suddenly get told as a player, you are valid and you are valuable, and what you say matters. Even though the GM is going to take that thing and turn it against you, it doesn't matter what your answer is, because it's just a plot point at that point in time. But what it gives you as a person is validity, because you know that later on, as the campaign progresses, as you do this thing, when you say, I believe my player sees this or does this or knows this, then the GM doesn't have space to back away and say, no, it's not like that. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they've already ceded that decisional area to the player. And that's where the fucking magic happens. I am not smart enough, creative enough, brilliant enough to give you the game that you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you what game you want obliquely. I'm going to make you tell me your deepest, darkest desires on the sly. And then I can give them to you in a space where you don't feel scared of being hurt. There's no retribution, and you're not risking my ego, because what is important to me as a player player, GM, and all of this is giving you what you want.
I'm gonna hit stop streaming in like 30 seconds because anything else you say is just gonna. That's the best ending. That's the best. That's as good as we were gonna nail it.
Fair enough.
That's. Damn, dude. Sorry. I.
That's okay. That's what I fucking want. That's what I want to codify into all of my games.
Yeah.
Anything less than that is not enough.
I get it. That's I think this is probably the longest I'm going to let any interviewer speak without interrupting them, because it's hard for me to let anyone speak without interrupting them generally, and yet I just wanted to keep hearing where that was going. That was phenomenal.
Good.
It's an hour and a half. That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is fucking phenomenal. Tracy, I love you. And yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody, hope you enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Mwah. Mwah.
Goodbye.
All right. And it stopped. That was fucking rad.
I'm glad. Because